The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the vast Wyoming territory as Sophia Hartley clutched the edge of her seat, her knuckles white with tension. The year was 1876, and what had begun as a routine journey from Cheyenne to the mining town of Silverdale had turned into a nightmare when the driver took an unfamiliar route to avoid a reported bandit blockade. "I don't like the look of those clouds," muttered Mr. Thornton, a silver-haired banker seated across from her. "Storm's brewing." Sophia nodded, trying to mask her growing unease. At 23 years old, she had left behind her comfortable life in Boston to accept a position as the new schoolteacher in Silverdale. The promise of independence and adventure had lured her west, but in this moment, as the stagecoach jostled violently along the narrow mountain trail, she questioned her decision. "Driver," called Mrs. Peterson, an older woman traveling to visit her son. "Perhaps we should seek shelter before nightfall," the driver's gruff voice carried back to them. "No towns for miles, madam. Best push on while we can still see." The wheels hit another rut, and Sophia winced as her head bumped against the window. Outside, pine trees gave way to a steep drop-off that seemed to plunge endlessly into the valley below. Her stomach lurched as the coach swayed dangerously close to the edge. Miles away, Samuel Xavier urged his horse up a rocky incline, his eyes scanning the horizon. At 30 years old, he'd spent nearly half his life roaming the frontier, working as a ranch hand, scout, and occasionally as a deputy when towns needed extra guns. Today, he was simply a cowboy returning from delivering a herd of cattle to Fort Laramie, eager to get back to the Double Creek Ranch where he'd been employed for the past year. The first drops of rain began to fall as Samuel spotted the stagecoach in the distance, moving at an alarming speed along the treacherous ridge known as Devil's Backbone. Even from this distance, he could tell something was wrong. The vehicle was swaying erratically, the horses seeming to be in a panic. "Whoa, easy there," he said to his horse, Cinder, as they paused to watch. Lightning cracked across the sky, and in that brief illumination, Samuel saw the disaster unfold. The stagecoach's lead horse reared in terror as thunder boomed overhead. The vehicle lurched violently, and then, as if in slow motion, the right wheels slipped over the edge of the ridge. Samuel spurred Cinder forward as the stagecoach tipped, tumbling down the steep embankment in a catastrophic cascade of splintering wood, screaming passengers, and terrified horses. "Dear God," Samuel whispered, urging his horse toward the ridge at a gallop. The rain was falling harder now, turning the trail slick and treacherous, but he navigated it with the skill born of years in the saddle. When he reached the spot where the stagecoach had gone over, Samuel dismounted quickly, tethering Cinder to a sturdy pine. The vehicle had rolled at least 100 feet down, coming to rest against a large boulder. One of the horses lay motionless while others thrashed in their harnesses, injured and panicked. Without hesitation, Samuel began his descent, half climbing, half sliding down the steep slope. The rain made the ground treacherous, and more than once he nearly lost his footing on the slick rocks and loose soil. By the time he reached the wreckage, his clothes were soaked through, and mud caked his boots. The scene was grim. The stagecoach lay on its side, one wheel still spinning slowly in the air. The driver had been thrown clear but lay motionless some distance away. Samuel checked him quickly but found no signs of life. With a heavy heart, he turned his attention to the coach itself. "Hello," he called out, approaching cautiously. "Anyone alive in there?" A faint moan answered him. Samuel moved to the door, now facing upward, and wrenched it open. Inside, the passengers were a tangle of limbs and luggage. The silver-haired man was clearly dead, his neck bent at an unnatural angle. An older woman was breathing but unconscious, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead. Then he saw her, a young woman with chestnut hair, pinned beneath a heavy trunk. Her eyes fluttered open as Samuel leaned in, revealing irises the color of summer grass. "Help," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding rain. "Please help us." "I've got you," Samuel assured her, carefully climbing into the wrecked coach. "Don't move. I need to get this trunk off you first." The confined space made movement difficult, but Samuel managed to brace himself and lift the heavy trunk. Sophia gasped as the pressure eased off her chest and legs. "Can you move your limbs?" he asked, his voice gentle but urgent. The storm was worsening, and they needed to get to shelter. Sophia wiggled her fingers and toes, then carefully bent her knees. "I think so," she said, wincing. "Nothing seems broken, but everything hurts." "That's good. What's your name, miss?" "Sophia." "Sophia Hartley." "Samuel Xavier," he replied. "I'm going to help you out now, Miss Hartley." He carefully helped Sophia sit up, then lifted her out of the wrecked coach. She was light in his arms, but he could feel her trembling, whether from shock or cold, he couldn't tell. Probably both. "Mrs. Peterson," Sophia said suddenly, trying to look back at the coach. "And Mr. Thornton. We have to help them." Samuel gently set her down on a relatively flat spot, sheltered slightly by an outcropping of rock. "I'll check on the other lady, the gentleman. I'm sorry, but he didn't make it." Sophia covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Samuel turned back to the coach and carefully extracted the unconscious Mrs. Peterson. Her pulse was weak and her breathing shallow. "She's alive, but hurt badly," he told Sophia. "We need to get you both somewhere dry and warm. There's an old line shack about 2 miles from here." "I've stayed there before." The rain continued to pour as Samuel fashioned a makeshift travois using branches and his slicker. He placed Mrs. Peterson on it as gently as possible, then helped Sophia to her feet. "Can you walk?" he asked, studying her pale face with concern. Sophia took a tentative step and grimaced. "I think so if we go slowly." Samuel nodded. "We'll need to get up the ridge first. It's steep, but I'll help you." The ascent was grueling. Samuel went first, pulling Mrs. Peterson's travois while reaching back to help Sophia. Several times she slipped in the mud, and once she nearly fell, saved only by Samuel's quick reaction as he caught her arm. By the time they reached the top, both were breathing hard, their clothes plastered to their bodies by the relentless rain. "You're doing great," Samuel encouraged, helping Sophia mount Cinder while he would lead the horse on foot. "Just hold on to the saddle horn. Cinder's steady, he won't let you fall." Sophia nodded, too exhausted to speak. Samuel secured the travois to the saddle and began leading the horse through the storm. The going was slow, the darkness now nearly complete, except for occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated their path. After what seemed like hours, the small line shack came into view, a simple one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs. Samuel helped Sophia dismount, then carried Mrs. Peterson inside. The shack was basic but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow bunk, a table, and 2 chairs. "It's not much," Samuel said apologetically as he laid Mrs. Peterson on the bunk. "It's perfect," Sophia replied, sinking gratefully onto one of the chairs. Samuel worked quickly, starting a fire with the dry wood stacked by the hearth. Once the flames were crackling, he turned to the 2 women. "You both need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I'll see if there's anything here you can use, then I'll step outside to take care of my horse." He found an old trunk containing some spare men's clothing, but dry. He handed Sophia a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers, then stepped outside to give her privacy and attend to Cinder. When he returned, Sophia had changed and was tending to Mrs. Peterson, who remained unconscious. She had removed the older woman's wet dress and covered her with a blanket. "She's burning with fever," Sophia said worriedly, "and this cut on her head looks bad." Samuel knelt beside the bunk, examining Mrs. Peterson's wound. "Head injuries can be tricky. All we can do is keep her comfortable and hope she wakes up." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small flask. "Whiskey," he explained. "Not much for medicine, but it might help clean that wound." Sophia took the flask, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you for everything. If you hadn't come along—" "No need for thanks," Samuel said, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. The ridge was rarely traveled, especially in such weather. If Samuel hadn't happened by when he did, they would likely have died in that wreckage. They worked together to clean and bandage Mrs. Peterson's wound, using strips torn from Sophia's petticoat. The older woman stirred and moaned but didn't wake. When they had done all they could, Samuel insisted that Sophia sit by the fire to warm herself while he made coffee from supplies in his saddlebag. "What brings you out this way, Miss Hartley?" Samuel asked as he handed her a tin cup of strong black coffee. Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I'm the new schoolteacher for Silverdale, or I was supposed to be. I'm not sure if I'll make it there now." "You will," Samuel assured her. "Once the storm passes, I'll get you both to Silverdale. It's only about 15 miles from here." "And you?" "Where are you headed?" "Double Creek Ranch. I work there as a hand." Sophia studied him over the rim of her cup. In the firelight, she could see that Samuel Xavier was a handsome man, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar and eyes the color of a stormy sky. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of a good nature despite his current serious expression. "Have you been a cowboy long?" she asked. Samuel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Since I was 16. Ran away from home in Missouri and never looked back." "You've been alone all this time," he shrugged. "Not alone. There's always work companions, townsfolk. But if you're asking if I have a wife waiting somewhere, the answer is no." Outside, the storm raged on, rain pelting the small window and wind howling through the cracks in the walls. Inside, the fire cast a warm glow as Sophia and Samuel talked through the night, taking turns checking on Mrs. Peterson. They spoke of their pasts, Sophia's sheltered upbringing in Boston and her desire to see more of the world, Samuel's years of wandering and the peace he'd finally found at Double Creek. "I never thought I'd stay in one place this long," Samuel admitted as the first hints of dawn lightened the sky outside. "But there's something about that valley that feels right." "I hope I find that in Silverdale," Sophia said softly. "A place that feels right." Their eyes met across the small space and something unspoken passed between them. Then Mrs. Peterson moaned, breaking the moment, and they both turned their attention to her. The older woman's eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in her gaze. "Where? What happened?" she asked, her voice weak. Sophia moved to her side. "The stagecoach crashed, Mrs. Peterson. This is Mr. Xavier. He rescued us." Mrs. Peterson's eyes moved to Samuel, who nodded respectfully. "Thank you, young man," she whispered. "I remember, the horses spooked, so much noise." "Try not to talk too much," Sophia advised. "You've got a nasty bump on your head." But Mrs. Peterson was already drifting back to sleep, her breathing more regular now. Samuel and Sophia exchanged relieved glances. "That's a good sign," he said. "The storm's letting up, too. We should be able to start for Silverdale in a few hours, once it's fully light." The journey to Silverdale was slow and careful. Samuel had retrieved their luggage from the wreckage before they left the line shack, so Sophia at least had dry clothes of her own to wear. Mrs. Peterson was still weak but conscious, secured to Cinder's saddle while Samuel led the horse and Sophia walked alongside. They arrived in town late in the afternoon, causing quite a stir as they made their way down the main street. A crowd gathered quickly, and soon Mrs. Peterson was being carried to the doctor's house while the sheriff questioned Samuel about the accident. "It's a miracle you found them," Sheriff Miller said, shaking his head. "Devil's Backbone is no place to be in a storm." "It was pure chance," Samuel replied, his eyes drifting to Sophia, who was speaking with a plump woman who had introduced herself as Mrs. Davis, the mayor's wife. "Well, chance or fate, you saved their lives," the sheriff said. "The town of Silverdale owes you a debt of gratitude." News of the accident spread quickly, and by evening, arrangements had been made. Mrs. Peterson would stay with the doctor until her son could be notified, and Sophia would board with Mrs. Davis until the small cottage reserved for the schoolteacher could be prepared. "You'll stay the night, of course," Mayor Davis told Samuel as they stood outside the town's only hotel. "The town will cover your room and meals. It's the least we can do." Samuel nodded his thanks, though his thoughts were on the journey back to Double Creek tomorrow and on the schoolteacher whose life he had saved. He hadn't expected to feel such a connection to Sophia Hartley. There was something about her courage in the face of disaster, her genuine concern for others despite her own injuries, that had touched something long dormant in his heart. That evening, a small dinner was held at the mayor's house in Samuel's honor. Sophia was there, wearing a borrowed dress that was slightly too large for her slender frame, her chestnut hair swept up in a simple style. When their eyes met across the room, she smiled warmly, and Samuel felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. "Mr. Xavier," she said, approaching him after dinner, "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. If there's ever anything I can do to repay you, there's no debt," Samuel interrupted gently. "I'm just glad I was there to help. Will you be leaving tomorrow?" She asked, a hint of disappointment in her voice. "I should. They'll be expecting me back at Double Creek." Sophia nodded, understanding but clearly saddened. "Well, if you're ever in Silverdale again, please call on me. I would be happy to see a familiar face." "I will," Samuel promised, surprised by how much he meant it. The next morning, Samuel prepared to depart, checking Cinder's saddle and packing his few belongings. As he was about to mount, he heard someone calling his name and turned to see Sophia hurrying toward him, a small package in her hands. "I'm glad I caught you," she said, slightly breathless. "I wanted to give you this." She handed him the package. "It's just some bread and cheese for your journey, and a book Wordsworth's poems. I noticed you admiring it last night." Samuel was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Miss Hartley. I'll treasure it." "Sophia, please," she said. "After what we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Sophia," he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his lips. "And I'm Samuel." They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Double Creek isn't so far, maybe 20 miles southwest. Perhaps when you're settled you could visit. The ranch owner, Mr. Hammond, hosts a gathering each summer. It's quite something to see." Sophia's face brightened. "I'd like that very much." With a tip of his hat, Samuel mounted Cinder and rode out of Silverdale, looking back once to see Sophia still standing there, watching him go. As he turned onto the trail that would lead him home, he realized he was already planning his next visit to town. The weeks that followed were busy ones for Sophia. The school term began, and she found herself with 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. The work was challenging but rewarding, and she quickly became a beloved figure in the small community. Her thoughts often drifted to Samuel, wondering how he was faring at Double Creek. For his part, Samuel returned to his duties at the ranch, but something had changed. He found himself volunteering for supply runs to town, hoping for a glimpse of the new schoolteacher, though he never quite worked up the courage to ride the extra distance to Silverdale. Then, in early June, Samuel was assigned to deliver a message to Sheriff Miller in Silverdale. His heart raced at the prospect of seeing Sophia again. He took extra care with his appearance that morning, trimming his beard and donning a clean shirt before setting out. Silverdale had changed in the months since his last visit. New buildings were going up, and the streets were busier with the influx of miners from the nearby hills. Samuel delivered his message to the sheriff, then casually inquired about the schoolteacher. "Miss Hartley. She's done wonders with that school," Sheriff Miller said. "You'll find her there now, most likely. School day ends at 3. Samuel thanked him and made his way to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. As he approached, he heard the sound of children's voices reciting a poem in unison. He dismounted and tied Cinder to a hitching post, then waited under a large oak tree until the school bell rang and children began streaming out of the building. When the last child had gone, Samuel removed his hat and walked to the doorway. Sophia was at her desk, her back to him, arranging papers. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the auburn highlights in her hair. "Excuse me, madam," Samuel said. "I'm looking for the teacher who survived that terrible stagecoach accident. Heard she's quite something." Sophia whirled around, her surprise giving way to delight as she recognized him. "Samuel, what a wonderful surprise!" She crossed the room quickly, stopping just short of embracing him, suddenly aware of propriety. "What brings you to Silverdale?" "Ranch business," he said, then added with a smile, "though I confess I was hoping to see you." A blush crept up Sophia's cheeks. "I'm glad. I've thought of you often, wondering how you were faring." "Well enough," he replied. "And you seem to have settled in here." "I have," she agreed. "I love teaching and the people have been kind." She paused, then asked, "How long will you be in town?" "Just today, I'm afraid. I need to head back by nightfall." Disappointment flickered across her face. "Oh, well, perhaps you could join me for tea before you go, Mrs. Davis packed me a lovely lunch that I haven't touched. There's plenty to share." They sat at one of the student desks, sharing bread, cheese, and apple slices while catching up on the past months. Samuel told her about life at the ranch, and Sophia shared stories of her students and the town's growing pains. "Remember that summer gathering I mentioned?" Samuel asked as their time together drew to a close. "It's in 2 weeks. Saturday next. I'd still like you to come if you're willing." Sophia's eyes lit up. "I would love to, but are you sure it would be proper? I don't know anyone there." "You know me," Samuel said simply. "And Mr. Hammond's daughter Rebecca will be there. She's about your age. I think you'd like her." "Then yes, I accept your invitation." Samuel left Silverdale that day with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before. The thought of seeing Sophia again in 2 weeks made the days ahead seem brighter somehow. The Hammond Summer Gathering was the social event of the season for ranchers and townspeople from miles around. Tables were set up in the shade of ancient cottonwoods, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Hammond and the ranch cook. Fiddle music filled the air, and children ran laughing through the crowd. Samuel waited anxiously by the ranch entrance, watching for Sophia. When she finally arrived, riding in the mayor's wagon with Mr. and Mrs. Davis, he felt his breath catch. She was wearing a simple blue dress that matched her eyes perfectly, and her hair was loosely pinned up, with curls framing her face. "You came," he said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Of course," she replied, smiling up at him. "I said I would." The day passed in a pleasant blur. Samuel introduced Sophia to everyone, proudly explaining how they had met. She charmed the Hammond family and quickly formed a friendship with Rebecca, just as Samuel had predicted. When the dancing began, Samuel hesitated only briefly before asking Sophia for a waltz. "I'm not much of a dancer," he admitted as he led her to the cleared space serving as a dance floor. "Neither am I," she confessed. "We can be awkward together." But they weren't awkward at all. They moved together as if they had been dancing for years, Samuel's hand warm and steady at the small of her back, Sophia following his lead with natural grace. As they twirled beneath the summer sky, something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing since that stormy night in the line shack. When the music ended, neither moved away immediately. "Sophia," Samuel began, his voice low. Samuel." Mr. Hammond called, interrupting the moment. "Come meet Judge Parker. He's just ridden in from Fort Smith." Samuel reluctantly excused himself, and by the time he was free again, Sophia was deep in conversation with Rebecca and some of the other young women. He caught her eye across the gathering, and she smiled warmly, causing his heart to skip a beat. Later, as the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the ranch yard, Samuel finally found a moment alone with Sophia. They walked a short distance from the crowd, stopping by a small creek that ran through the Hammond property. "It's beautiful here," Sophia said, gazing at the water reflecting the golden light of sunset. "I can see why you love it." "It is beautiful," Samuel agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the scenery. "Sophia, I've been thinking a lot since that day on Devil's Backbone, about chance and fate, and how sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we least expect them." Sophia turned to face him, her eyes serious. "I've been thinking about that too." Samuel took a deep breath. "I'm not a man of many words, but I want you to know that meeting you has changed something in me. I find myself looking forward to seeing you in a way I've never felt before." "Samuel," Sophia said softly, stepping closer to him. "I feel the same way." He reached out hesitantly, taking her hand in his. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you to be part of it." In answer, Sophia rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "I'd like that very much." Their courtship was unconventional by the standards of the day. With 20 miles separating them, they couldn't see each other as often as they might have wished. Samuel rode to Silverdale whenever he could get away from ranch duties, sometimes just for a few hours on a Sunday afternoon. Sophia occasionally traveled to Double Creek with the Davis family when they had business nearby. Their meetings were precious and often too brief, but each one deepened their connection. They exchanged letters when they couldn't meet, Samuel's handwriting improving with practice as he shared his thoughts and feelings in ways he never had before. By autumn, Samuel had saved enough money to put a down payment on a small parcel of land halfway between Silverdale and Double Creek. It wasn't much, just 10 acres with a stream running through it, but it was his, and he had plans. On a crisp October day, he took Sophia to see the property. The aspens were turning gold, and the air was sharp with the scent of pine and the promise of winter. "What do you think?" he asked nervously as they stood on a small rise overlooking the land. Sophia turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's wonderful, Samuel, but what will you do with it?" "I was thinking," he said, reaching for her hand, "that it might be a good place to build a house. A life." Sophia's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "Samuel," he knelt on the ground before her, still holding her hand. "Sophia Hartley, I never thought I'd find someone who makes me want to stop wandering, but you've become my home wherever you are. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course I will." Samuel stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt in his heart. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "I'll build us a home right here," he promised. "Not a grand one at first, but we can add to it as years go by." "I don't need grand," Sophia assured him. "Just you." They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Silverdale. The building was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and despite the winter chill, warmth filled the space as friends from both Silverdale and Double Creek gathered to witness their vows. Sophia wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Davis had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned her mother's wedding gown. Samuel, unaccustomed to formal wear, looked handsome if slightly uncomfortable in a new black suit. Mrs. Peterson, fully recovered from the accident and reunited with her son, sat in the front pew, beaming like a proud parent. "It was worth going over that ridge to see this day," she told anyone who would listen. "Just look at them, it was meant to be." After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by everyone in attendance. There was dancing and laughter, and as midnight approached, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their life together. Samuel had worked tirelessly through the fall to build a small but sturdy cabin on their land. It wasn't fully finished, some of the interior walls were still just framing, and the front porch was only partially built, but it was solid and warm, with a stone fireplace and windows that would catch the morning sun. When they arrived, Samuel lifted Sophia into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a tradition his mother had always said was important. Inside, he had prepared a surprise. The main room was furnished with a table and chairs he had made himself, and a bed with a colorful quilt gifted by Mrs. Hammond stood in the corner. But what took Sophia's breath away were the bookshelves lining one wall, already filled with volumes, her small collection from Boston. Supplemented by books Samuel had collected from every town within riding distance. "Oh, Samuel," she breathed, running her fingers along the spines. "It's perfect." "Not yet," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But it will be with time, with us." That winter was harsh, with storms that sometimes left them snowbound for days, but neither Sophia nor Samuel minded the isolation. They settled into a rhythm together, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. When spring came, Samuel planted a vegetable garden while Sophia started a small flower bed near the front door. They added a chicken coop and acquired 2 milk cows. By summer, Samuel had completed the porch, and they often sat there in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. Sophia continued teaching in Silverdale, riding to town on a gentle mare Samuel had trained especially for her. In the evenings, she sometimes held reading classes for ranch hands from Double Creek, who wanted to improve their education, but were too proud or too old to attend regular school. Samuel divided his time between their land and work at Double Creek, gradually reducing his hours at the ranch as their own place became more self-sufficient. He had a way with horses that Mr. Hammond valued too much to lose entirely, so they worked out an arrangement where Samuel helped with breaking and training new stock. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, was born the following spring. She had Samuel's dark hair and Sophia's green eyes, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she was the center of their world. Samuel carved a cradle that could rock gently with the push of a foot, and Sophia sewed tiny clothes from her old dresses. As Elizabeth grew, so did their home and land. Samuel added rooms to the cabin, eventually turning it into a proper house with a separate kitchen and bedrooms. They acquired more livestock and planted fruit trees that would take years to bear, but represented their commitment to this place and each other. 2 years after Elizabeth's birth, their son James arrived, followed by another daughter, Margaret, 3 years later. Their family was complete, and their happiness seemed to expand with each passing season. They never forgot how they had met. Each year on the anniversary of the Stagecoach accident, Samuel and Sophia would ride to Devil's Backbone, leaving the children with friends, to remember the twist of fate that had brought them together. They would place flowers in memory of Mr. Thornton and the driver who had died, then have a picnic overlooking the valley. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden by when you did? Sophia asked on their 10th anniversary as they sat side by side on a blanket spread over the grass. Samuel took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band on her finger. "I used to. Now I just feel grateful that I did. Everything good in my life came from that moment, you, our children, our home." "Sometimes I think about that poor stagecoach driver," Sophia mused. "If he hadn't taken that unfamiliar route, if the storm hadn't spooked the horses." If, Samuel said gently. "We could drive ourselves mad with ifs. What matters is what did happen and what we've built since then." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're right, and what we've built is beautiful." As they approached their 15th wedding anniversary, Silverdale had grown into a proper town with a bank, a hotel, and even a small newspaper. Double Creek Ranch had expanded too, with Mr. Hammond's son-in-law now handling much of the day-to-day operations. The Xavier family's land had grown to 40 acres, with a reputation for producing the finest horses in the territory. Elizabeth, now 14, had her father's way with animals and spent every free moment in the stables. James, at 12, showed a talent for building and design, always sketching new improvements for the farm. 10-year-old Margaret had inherited her mother's love of books and learning, and already declared her intention to be a teacher like Sophia. On Christmas Eve, exactly 15 years after their wedding day, Samuel and Sophia hosted a gathering for friends and family. Their home, once a small cabin, now stood as a testament to their years together, spacious, warm, and filled with memories. The bookshelves Samuel had built as a wedding gift now lined the walls of a dedicated library, and photographs chronicling their family's growth hung in carefully crafted frames. After their guests had gone and the children were asleep, Samuel and Sophia sat by the fire, sharing a glass of wine and reflecting on their journey together. "Did I ever tell you," Samuel said, his arm around his wife's shoulders, "that the day I saw that stagecoach go over the ridge, I almost took a different trail home? There was a shortcut through the valley that would have saved me an hour's ride." Sophia looked up at him, surprised. "No, you never mentioned that. Something told me to take the high route that day. Call it instinct or divine intervention or just plain luck, but whatever it was, it led me to you." Sophia reached up to touch his face, now bearing the lines of 15 years of laughter, worry, and love. "And you led me to this life I never could have imagined back in Boston. A life fuller and richer than anything I dreamed possible." Outside, snow began to fall gently, covering their land in a pristine blanket of white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly as Samuel bent to kiss his wife, both of them grateful for that fateful day when a stagecoach went over a ridge at dusk, and a cowboy rode down and pulled her out alive, the beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime.